Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What started as a lighthearted interview about movies and charity work turned into one of the most heated showdowns daytime TV has ever seen. Brad Pitt, Hollywood's golden boy, known for his calm demeanor, sat across from Joy Behar on The View, expecting the usual banter about his career and his humanitarian efforts. But Joy had other plans. What followed was a clash of values, egos, and tempers that no one in the studio audience could have predicted. Viewers saw a rare side of Brad Pitt, unflinching, direct, and unwilling to let Joy's relentless jabs slide. And Joy? She was every bit as fiery and combative as her reputation suggested. The back and forth grew so intense that the conversation spiraled out of control. Tension filled the air, the panel struggled to contain the fallout, and in a shocking finale, Brad Pitt did something no one expected. He stood up, removed his mic, and walked straight off the set. This wasn't just an interview. It was a cultural moment, a viral clash that left fans divided, social media ablaze, and one question echoing everywhere. Did Joy Behar push Brad Pitt too far? The studio lights beamed down on The View's iconic roundtable as the audience cheered, their applause filling the air with energy. Brad Pitt, dressed in a relaxed beige suit with a soft white shirt, smiled warmly as he took his seat beside Joy Behar. The other co-hosts leaned in, visibly excited. After all, it wasn't every day that one of Hollywood's most admired actors joined them live. "Brad Pitt, ladies and gentlemen," Whoopi Goldberg announced with her usual flair. "Movie star, activist, and, let's be honest, probably the most charming man in Hollywood." The audience roared with laughter and applause, while Brad raised his hands modestly. "Oh, I don't know about that," he chuckled, "but thank you. I'm happy to be here." At first, the conversation flowed easily. Sonny Hostin asked Brad about his latest humanitarian project, which involved building sustainable housing in struggling communities. He spoke with a grounded sincerity, his words resonating with hope. "I've been blessed with more than I ever imagined," Brad said. "I think it's our duty to give back, especially when the world feels so divided." The audience nodded in agreement, and even Joy, known for her sharp, often skeptical tone, offered a brief smile, but behind her eyes was a flicker of something else: restlessness. When the conversation shifted to Brad's new film, a sweeping drama about family and forgiveness, the table seemed united in admiration. "You've had an incredible career," Sarah Haynes gushed, "but what drew you to this story?" Brad leaned forward, thoughtful. "Stories that explore human connection matter to me. We live in a time where people talk past each other, where shouting matches replace listening. This movie is about slowing down, remembering that love, tradition, and roots mean something." That's when Joy's smile faltered. Her eyebrow arched, and the audience felt the first tremor of tension. "So," Joy said, her voice light but edged, "when you talk about tradition, Brad, what exactly do you mean? Because tradition can be a nice word, but it can also mean clinging to old values that don't work in today's world." The studio grew quieter, sensing the shift. Brad didn't flinch. He kept his voice calm. "I don't mean tradition in a way that excludes people," he replied. "I mean holding on to things that ground us: family dinners, storytelling, music passed down through generations. Those things connect us." Joy leaned back, arms crossing, her signature look of challenge settling in. "Sure, but sometimes holding on to the past keeps us from moving forward. You know, young people today are building new cultures, redefining family, love, even gender roles. And that's progress." The audience broke into light applause. Brad's jaw tightened slightly, though he smiled through it. "Progress is important," he agreed, but I think if we lose all connection to the past, we risk floating without an anchor. Tradition doesn't have to be a prison, it can be a foundation. Whoopi stepped in with a laugh, trying to cut the rising friction. Okay, let's not turn this into Meet the Press. We're supposed to be talking about your movie. The audience chuckled, but the tension didn't dissipate. It lingered, thick in the air. Brad returned to speaking about the film, but Joy wasn't done. A few minutes later, as he mentioned how the movie reminded him of the importance of family meals, she cut in again. You keep talking about family meals and traditions like they're the solution to everything, she said, her tone sharper now. But for a lot of people, those old traditions came with baggage, patriarchy, control, exclusion. Do you really think that's what people need to go back to? Brad paused, his smile fading slightly. He chose his words carefully. I think people need balance. You can respect new ways of living while still honoring the things that kept us connected before. Family isn't about control, it's about belonging. The room buzzed. Some audience members clapped. Others exchanged glances, feeling the sparks fly. Joy smirked, tilting her head. Belonging is one thing. Preaching about tradition like it's the cure-all, that sounds a little nostalgic, maybe even naive. Brad finally turned fully toward her, his eyes steady. His voice was low, but it carried weight. And dismissing it all as outdated sounds a little cynical, Joy. Maybe we need both, respect for progress and respect for where we came from. The studio fell silent for a moment. The warmth of the opening conversation had cooled. The polite start had morphed into something else, an uneasy dance between Hollywood idealism and Joy's fiery skepticism. By the time they cut to commercial break, the tension at the table was undeniable. Brad smiled for the cameras, but his jaw remained tight. Joy adjusted her glasses, preparing for round two. The battle lines had been drawn, and everyone in the studio and watching at home knew this was only the beginning. The moment the show returned from commercial, the energy was different. Gone was the lighthearted chatter. The smiles were there, but they were tighter, more performative. Viewers at home could sense it immediately. This was no longer just an interview. It was becoming a debate. Sonny Hostin tried to bridge the gap by asking Brad about his charity work. "You've been very outspoken about housing insecurity," she began. "It's incredible how much you've done in New Orleans and other places. Do you think Hollywood does enough to use its platform for change?" Brad nodded, his voice steady. "I think we all could do more. Hollywood's good at shining a spotlight, but sometimes it forgets about real people. At the end of the day, it's about families, neighbors, and communities looking out for each other. That's where change starts." The audience applauded, but Joy was already leaning in, her expression unreadable. "Families, neighbors, communities," she repeated, almost rolling the words around like she was testing them. "Brad, you keep circling back to this idea of the traditional family, as though it's some magic formula. But let's be real, some of those so-called traditional values excluded people. Gay couples, single moms, blended families, where did they fit into this rosy picture you're painting?" The applause turned into murmurs. Brad adjusted slightly in his chair, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm not excluding anyone, Joy. I think love is love, family is family, however it looks. But there's value in togetherness, in showing up for each other consistently. That doesn't go out of style." Joy's voice sharpened, cutting through the applause. "But that's the thing, Brad. Togetherness isn't just about Sunday dinners and old-fashioned rituals. For a lot of people, those rituals were tied to control, inequality, even abuse. You can't separate tradition from the baggage it carried." For the first time, Brad's smile faded completely. His tone shifted, deeper, firmer. And throwing it all away because some people used it badly, that's just as dangerous. You don't abandon the idea of family because some families failed. You work to make it better. The studio reacted audibly, some clapping, some gasping. The escalation was no longer subtle, it was front and center. Sarah Haynes tried to mediate. I think what Brad's saying is that maybe tradition can evolve, Joy. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But Joy wasn't backing down. She turned her full body toward Brad, her voice rising with each word. Brad, with all due respect, you're a movie star. You've had every privilege in the world. Do you really understand what it's like for people who didn't have those warm dinners, for whom tradition meant oppression, not comfort? The crowd hummed, half in agreement, half in discomfort. The air was electric. Brad leaned forward now, his hand tapping the table for emphasis. You're right, Joy. I've been lucky. I don't pretend to know everyone's pain. But I've seen broken families too. I've seen what happens when people are left without connection, without roots. You think progress fixes loneliness? It doesn't. If anything, people feel more isolated now than ever. The audience clapped again, louder this time, and Brad's voice carried over them. We can't just keep tearing everything down without asking, what are we building in its place? Joy fired back instantly. We're building equality, Brad. We're building freedom. We're making sure that the next generation doesn't get trapped in outdated molds just because some people can't let go of the past. Her voice drew cheers, especially from younger audience members. The split in the room was undeniable. Some cheering Brad's defense of tradition, others rallying behind Joy's call for progress. Whoopi tried to step in again. All right, let's breathe. We're not Congress here. But Brad wasn't finished. He turned back to Joy, voice calm but cutting. Progress without roots isn't progress. It's chaos. And maybe the problem is that too many people think tradition is the enemy, when in reality, it's what holds us together when everything else falls apart. The studio erupted. Half the audience roared in applause, the other half booed and shouted. The clash wasn't just between Brad and Joy anymore. It was between two visions of America, live on daytime television. The co-hosts exchanged nervous glances. This was no longer about a movie or even Brad's activism. It was about something deeper: values, culture, identity. And neither Brad nor Joy showed any signs of backing down. By the time the second break rolled around, viewers could feel the stakes rising. Social media was already buzzing, hashtags forming in real time. And everyone in the studio knew the polite start was long gone. Now it was a battle. And the real fireworks were still to come. When the show came back from commercial, the tension was already baked into the air. The studio audience sat on the edge of their seats, whispering nervously, while the co-hosts exchanged guarded looks. Brad Pitt leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his easy Hollywood charm stripped away. Joy Behar, on the other side of the table, was ready, her notes scattered, but her glare focused directly on him. It didn't take long. Brad, Joy said, voice sharp as glass, it's easy for you to sit here and talk about roots and tradition. You've lived in mansions. You've had chefs and nannies. Do you really think you're qualified to lecture America about family values? The crowd gasped. Sarah Haynes audibly muttered, "Oh, wow," under her breath. Brad straightened, his eyes narrowing, his voice lower now. Joy, don't confuse privilege with ignorance. I've had my struggles too. Divorce, custody battles, addiction. You think I don't know what a broken family looks like? I've lived it. The studio fell silent. For the first time, Brad's calm cracked, and the rawness of his words cut through. Joy, unfazed, pressed harder. But that's exactly the point. You, of all people, should know that the old systems didn't work. They failed you, Brad, and yet here you are defending them, almost romanticizing them. Why? Brad leaned forward, his voice rising, the actor in him now fully on display, but this time fueled by genuine emotion. Because, Joy, what failed me wasn't tradition. It was people not living up to it. It was promises broken. It was love abandoned. It was selfishness dressed up as progress. Don't you dare tell me family values don't matter. They're the only thing that does. The crowd erupted, half roaring in applause, half shouting over him. Whoopi tried to cut in. All right, let's... But Joy interrupted, jabbing her finger in Brad's direction. And don't you dare lecture me about promises, Brad. Hollywood men like you, famous, adored, how many times do we have to watch you screw up before you realize you're not the model for America's families? That was it. The jab landed. Brad froze for a split second, his face tight, the words visibly stinging. Then he leaned in, voice breaking with anger. You think this is about me? This is about millions of people out there who just want something real to hold on to, something steady. You can mock me all you want, Joy, but don't mock them. The audience roared again, torn down the middle. The camera panned wide, capturing the chaos, the hosts trying to speak, the crowd buzzing, Brad's eyes blazing, Joy's arms crossed like she had just delivered a knockout punch. This wasn't just debate anymore. It was personal, and Brad Pitt, the unshakable movie star, was visibly rattled. The show had reached its emotional flashpoint, and everyone watching knew it could only explode from here. The tension had gone from a simmer to a rolling boil. Every word exchanged between Brad Pitt and Joy Behar now felt like a dagger. The other co-hosts were caught in the crossfire, their attempts to mediate drowned out by the force of two personalities unwilling to yield. Brad's jaw was tight, his voice steady but trembling with restrained fury. Joy, you want to sit there and act like I don't know struggle, like I don't know pain? I've been through it all. Addiction, broken family, public humiliation, and I still believe in something bigger than myself. That's not weakness, that's resilience. The audience applauded loudly, but Joy cut straight through the noise. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Resilience or denial, Brad? Because every time men like you try to romanticize the past, what you're really doing is propping up a system that hurt more people than it helped. Women, minorities, kids. You're defending a fairy tale that never existed. The crowd gasped. Brad pushed back his chair slightly, shaking his head. That's not true, Joy. That's your version of the story, not mine. Just because tradition was abused doesn't mean tradition itself is the problem. Maybe people don't want your so-called modern solutions. Maybe they're tired of being told everything that came before was wrong. The clash was reaching its peak. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the explosion coming, stepped in. Guys, hold on. This is supposed to be a conversation, not a courtroom. But Joy wasn't letting up. She leaned closer, her voice low, but sharp enough to cut glass. Brad, let's be honest here. You're an actor. You play roles. You don't live the reality everyday Americans face. You can afford to idealize whatever values you want because you don't have to live with the consequences. That was it. The jab hit home. Brad slammed his hand lightly on the table, not out of violence, but frustration boiling over. His voice cracked with raw emotion. You think I'm sitting here because it's easy for me? You think I flew across the country to be mocked on national television? I came here because I care, because I believe people need to hear that not everything old is broken, not everything traditional is toxic. But if you're just going to reduce me to some shallow Hollywood stereotype, then maybe I don't belong here." The audience was stunned into silence. Joy smirked slightly, leaning back, as if she'd won. Brad stared at her for a long moment, the weight of the silence pressed down on the set. Then, in one sharp motion, he stood up. "I'm done," he said, his voice clipped, final. "I don't need this circus." The crowd erupted, half booing, half cheering, as the cameras followed Brad Pitt walking off the stage, past the co-hosts scrambling in their chairs, past the stunned producers waving frantically off-screen. The image of him storming away, his back to the chaos, was seared instantly into television history. Whoopi muttered into the microphone, half under her breath, but still caught by the cameras. Well, that just happened. The fallout was immediate. Twitter exploded. Within minutes, #BradWalksOff trended worldwide. Clips of the clash flooded Instagram and TikTok. Some viewers hailed Brad as a man standing up for values under fire. Others mocked him, calling his dramatic exit proof that Hollywood stars couldn't handle real debate. Headlines spread like wildfire. Brad Pitt storms off The View after heated clash with Joy Behar. "Don't mock them," Pitt defends traditional America before exit. Joy Behar leaves Brad Pitt speechless on live TV. By the time the broadcast ended, the debate had already leapt from the stage into America's living rooms, coffee shops, and workplaces. Some saw Brad as a hero, others a coward. But one thing was certain: his walk-off wasn't just television drama, it was a cultural moment. And the real question wasn't just who won the argument, it was what the walk-off said about the deeper divide running through America itself.
In the days following Brad Pitt's dramatic walk-off, the moment became more than just viral entertainment. It became a litmus test for America's cultural divide. Clips of Brad storming off circulated endlessly, dissected frame by late-night hosts, political commentators, and everyday people on social media. The argument wasn't just about Brad versus Joy anymore, it was about what each of them represented. For Brad supporters, his exit was seen as a bold stand against a culture that often ridicules traditional values. They praised him for refusing to sit quietly while Joy Behar mocked what he held dear. To them, his departure symbolized a refusal to play along with a media landscape that they felt was dismissive of faith, family, and history. His words, "Not everything old is broken, not everything traditional is toxic," were printed on T-shirts, shared as inspirational posts, and repeated in podcasts and talk radio. But critics saw it differently. They argued Brad couldn't handle the heat of a tough conversation, and that his storming off proved Joy's point, that nostalgia for the past often crumbles when challenged with the realities of inequality and injustice. Memes mocked his dramatic exit, casting him as the latest celebrity unable to deal with strong women on live TV. What no one could deny was that the clash struck a cultural nerve. It wasn't just a celebrity spat, it was the embodiment of a generational struggle. Joy Behar, sharp, uncompromising, and unapologetically progressive, stood for modern critique and questioning of old institutions. Brad Pitt, emotional, wounded, yet unwavering, represented the yearning to preserve tradition in an age that seemed to be tearing it apart. Weeks later, the moment was still reverberating. Morning shows replayed the clip. Opinion columns debated whether Brad's walk-off was a sign of weakness or a refusal to bend. And millions of Americans, watching from their couches, argued the same questions at dinner tables and over coffee. Ironically, the legacy of Brad's walk-off wasn't about who won the argument. It was about the fact that two cultural archetypes, Hollywood royalty and daytime TV firebrand, had collided so forcefully that it forced the country to pay attention. The argument became a mirror, reflecting back the nation's own divisions. As Brad remained quiet in the weeks afterwards, his silence only fueled speculation. Would he return to The View for redemption? Would he double down in an interview? Or had he said everything he needed to say by walking out? What everyone agreed on was this: the clash between Brad Pitt and Joy Behar would be remembered as one of those rare live TV moments that outgrew the screen. It wasn't about an actor and a talk show host. It was about America's culture war, fought out in front of millions with no script, no retakes, and no clear winner. And maybe that was the point.